We have a person today by the name of Vincent Dacquino, who is going to talk about Sybil. And I think he's going to give us a definitive answer, or so close to it, that he is going to be a landscaper and plant historical grass in that bare spot. And that bare spot, I hope, comes out greener and taller than the rest of the grass around it. Vinny, take over.
Our pleasure. I want to tell you that I've had quite a journey with Sybil for about 20 years. And it's been an interesting journey. But I want to tell you that some of the most important people for me in this journey are in this room. The Kent Historical Society has been with me from the very beginning. And I just can't thank you enough. And I'm not going to say this outside of this room, but I will say it here. There is a shameless plug in the book for donations for a Sybil museum that I did sneak in there. Mentioned that the Kent Historical Society has been trying to raise funds for the site. Because I believe in Sybil, and I believe in you, and I know you believe in her. This journey started 20 years ago for me. I saw a sign on my way to teach my 6th grade students. It said Sybil rode by this spot to help repel the British in Danbury, Connecticut with Colonel Ludington. I had no idea who Sybil Ludington was. And I was actually embarrassed because if she actually did ride by that spot near the Red Mills in Mahopac, then she practically rode by my house. So I went to the Mahopac Library. Historians warned me that I don't live in Mahopac, nor do I go to Carmel, nor do I go to Cold Springs. So I went to the Mahopac Library, and there was a gentleman standing there. Happens to be the same gentleman that's sitting in front of me here. For 20 years, he's been by my side. I went in and I said, Sybil Ludington. And he said, no. I said, not you. He said, vertical file. I went to the vertical file, and there was an incredible file about a 16-year-old female hero of the Revolutionary War. Man, women just have not been given a fair shake in American history. I was thrilled. So I began studying her. Didn't take very long to find out that almost everything in her biography was wrong. That they said she was the mother of 6 children, 4 boys and 2 girls. I checked 22 cemeteries. If she had 6 kids, they never buried them. So it couldn't be. She married a lawyer from Catskill, New York. A lawyer who never tried a case because he was in none of their books. Also said that his name was Henry, or Edmund, or Edward Ogden, depending on the article. I said, what? It took me 3 years to straighten out her story, with the help of a lot of people. And when I finally got it all together, I published it in 2000. Well, 20 years later, people were still buying this book, but my publisher said, we've done our 20 years. And he decided they would not reprint it. I said, oh, gee, that's too bad. Yes. Which meant that the rights reverted back to me and would give me the opportunity to write a new book. So I went online. What a discouraging adventure. I went on to flip. This is the new book. I know you're going to recognize this, and I know you're going to recognize these people, especially this one who created the statue. Well, I went in and I decided what I need to do is see if I had any effect on these people. So flip. So I went through, reread the call to arms, made sure I covered all my bases, flip. When I went back to the internet, these things were back. And I challenge each and every one of you to go online and Google Sybil Ludington. Your heart will break, because it will say that Sybil was born in Fredericksburg, where she lived with her family until she was 23. Sybil actually wasn't born in Fredericksburg. They moved there a year after they got married, and they had Sybil in 61. So was she definitely born in Connecticut? Trust me, I went through all kinds of records in Connecticut to try to pinpoint exactly the place she was born. There is no proof that she was born in Fredericksburg, and there's really no proof she was born in Connecticut. The records aren't there. One thing about this book, I could tell you right now, that the kind of researcher I am, there's a number of things in here that are left hanging. I don't have conclusive answers to every single part of Sybil's story, but I promise you this, I have more answers than anyone else. And I can stand by those answers through documents. She did not marry Henry, Edward, or Edmund with a U. Edmund with a U was her grandson, not her husband. He spelled his name with an O. When you look in the internet today, you'll find people who say she's married to one of these other people who don't exist. Her husband was not a lawyer in Catskill, New York. In a document, I found that he actually ran a public house near Route 22 before they moved to Catskill, New York. Sybil did not marry her childhood sweetheart. She got married at 23 years old. She was an old maid in those days. She was not the mother of 6 children, 2 girls and 4 boys. Many of you know what actually happened. Pelletreau, and I blamed Pelletreau for this. I no longer blame Pelletreau because I have documentation to show it wasn't his fault. But what his book said was that Sybil, the oldest, married Henry Ogden. She didn't. She married Edmund Ogden. Henry was her son. He had 6 children, 2 girls and 4 boys. Her son was not a hero for trying to save women and children in Fort Riley. Her grandson was. Ludingtonville, New York was not named in her honor. We have a map from 1854 that shows that it was referred to as Ludingtonville way back before we knew about the ride. It was named after her father, not after her ride. Go online today, you'll hear people say that. Flip. She did not die at 78 years old. You know who said that? Mathematicians. Because she was born in 61 and she died in 39. Mathematicians, how old would she be? 78 years old, if she made it to her birthday. But she didn't. She died before her birthday. She died at 77 and 10 months old. She did not ride through Kent, Connecticut to warn of a British attack. So why would I even say that? Because the United States postal stamp that created a stamp in her honor and said on the back of the stamp that she rode through the Kent, Connecticut. Flip. Flip again.
There's still more on that.
Yep, flip again. On the dark night of April 26, 1777, 16-year-old Sybil Ludington rode her horse Star alone through the Connecticut countryside, rallying her father's militia. She didn't ride through the Connecticut. She rode through New York. Why would they make that mistake? Because there is a Connecticut. And they likely confused it. Now, flip again. The Daughters of the American Revolution, and we'll be talking about that a little bit, because the Daughters of the American Revolution, kind of a sticky wicket, because what's happening is that when I went back and found all those errors, I found something much worse. I found articles that said, A, Sybil Ludington is just a myth, a legend. If you look in the Putnam newspaper for this week, there's an article about Sybil Ludington being a legend, a myth. Second thing, her father never was involved in the Danbury affair. I have pension records to prove otherwise. You can't argue with a pension record. It's a deposition. It's an oath. So, third thing, the battle was insignificant. It was really an unimportant battle anyway. Don't you tell me that. General David Wooster was killed in that battle. Americans were killed in that battle. Houses were destroyed. Hundreds of supplies were destroyed. Don't tell me it was insignificant. And the fourth thing, Sybil never took the ride. So I left the internet furious. Also, another thing that really kicked me off, and that was in the recent article as well, is that the DAR no longer supports Sybil Ludington. That they yanked the book from their shelf. I beg to differ. The DAR is the one that put her on the lake. They're the ones that helped get the statue there. The DAR has supported Sybil from the beginning. However, the DAR has a very strict protocol, and they have rules about how to create a patriot. Now, unfortunately, some of those rules involve military records. Women weren't allowed to be soldiers, so it was very difficult to get the kind of documentation that they would need to make her a patriot. But does that mean they didn't support her? Not at all. They supported her from the beginning, even the National. In the 1970s, no, go back. In the 1970s, there was a collection of medals issued by the DAR, a series consisting of 36 medals. Sybil was number 20. It was called the Great Women of the American Revolution. They paid for it. They created those medals in her honor. They believed in her. Now, however, as so characteristic of Sybil's story, on the back it says, Sybil Ludington, she volunteered to ride alone through the New York countryside to muster her father's regiment. Her mission was crucial to the Patriot victory at Danbury. Oops, we lost. There was no Patriot victory. Throughout her entire history, Sybil's life is marked by error. That's why I'm a man on a mission. I wanted to get through, and I wanted to make it clear that this woman deserves her place on the pedestal. So, I did another thing. I sat with a member of the DAR who said to me, who reminded me that a replica of the statue was at the DAR office, headquarters in Washington, D.C. And I contacted them. They said they would send me a photo of the exhibit in the CAR museum, not the DAR, the CAR. The CAR rents space from the DAR. And they borrowed the replica, and a painting of Anna Hyatt Huntington. They put it in their museum, and they called the exhibit Kids Kids of the American Revolution. Well, I asked for a picture of it, and the woman there was wonderful. She sent me a photo of the exhibit, Flip. Oh my God. There's the painting, there's the statue, and there's 3 of my books in the exhibit in Washington, D.C. Do they recognize Sybil's Ride? My 3 books are all about Sybil's Ride. Of course they recognize it. At least the CAR does. So the DAR, in my opinion, and in my understanding, doesn't not believe in Sybil. They just need the right documentation. And I said, I have to find it. So I began a new mission. And I decided I would have to look further and see what else was going on. Well, there were a couple things going on. One, a doctoral student created a paper, a Paula Hunt, and her article stirred up a lot of controversy. She is on Sybil's side. She believes in Sybil. And her article wasn't really about the ride. It was about how Americans need to believe in someone like Sybil. And she wrote an entire article about how we need to embrace heroes, men and women, from the Revolution. So it was a good article, but the article did mention that a book was pulled from the shelf of the DAR store or library because of the documentation, there not being enough documentation. Well, people went right past all the wonderful things she said and went right to that and said, there you go, Sybil's a myth. Furthermore, they said, hey, when was the first time Sybil's story was mentioned? They said 1907 in the memoirs. Well, in this book, I said, no. There was another mention by Lewis S. Patrick, who was actually Sybil's nephew, but like a grandnephew. So he wrote an article in the Connecticut Magazine mentioning the ride, but naysayers said, yeah, he's related. The memoirs were written by a very famous biographer, Willis Fletcher Johnson. But Lavinia and Charles Ludington paid him to do that. Naysayers said, paid biographer? Get out. I'm telling you, the ride never happened, man. He's a paid biographer. He wrote what they wanted him to write. And he never even gave any sources. For the only ones he mentioned were Charles and Lewis S. Patrick. So, in 2012, a great thing happened. They began digitizing historical books. And they digitized a book by a woman named Martha Lamb, who was a very famous historian. She wrote a book about New York City, and in there was an account of Sybil's Ride, 1880. So some of the naysayers said, all right, better. It's not 1907, 100 and something years later, closer. However, Martha Lamb never gave her sources. So people said, so how do we know? Nothing. She heard it from somebody and she wrote about it. Not enough. Sybil didn't take this ride. So I had to go to work. And I did what I do best. I traced everything back to its roots. I went to the New York Historical Society and I looked for Martha Lamb's notes. I said she had to have sources. This lady was famous. Those notes have to be somewhere. So I went to the New York Historical Society and oh my God, I got friendly with the man in charge of manuscripts. I told him what I was up to, and he said to me, "Did you check the Ludington family papers?" I said, "The what?" He said, "The Ludington family papers." I said, "Where are they?" He said, "We'll get the box." He got the box and put this box in front of me. I almost had a heart attack. There were letters in there from Sybil's nephew, from Sybil's niece, Sybil's grandchildren, even the one who died, Edmund Augustus Ogden, just before his death. A letter from her granddaughter, Emily, who sent a letter to Patterson to try to get proof of Sybil's marriage so that she could get her pension papers. I stood looking at these letters and said, "You've got to be kidding me." So I went back to my friend. I said, "When did these papers get here?" He said, 2015. I said, "By Betty, Jane Ludington." I called Betty and I said, "Who's Jane Ludington?" You know, do we know a Jane Ludington? Turns out her first name is actually Harriet. And it's not really Jane. She called herself Jane. She's married to Charles Townsend Ludington Jr., who is the direct descendant of Colonel Ludington. There was Colonel Ludington, and then Colonel Ludington's son, Lewis, had a son, Charles Ludington. Charles Ludington is the one that's mentioned in the memoirs as having given so much of his information to Willis Fletcher Johnson for the memoirs. So it was amazing, amazing. So I went to him and I said, "Do you have her phone number?" And he says, "If I did, I couldn't give it to you." I said, "Where's she live?" He said, "Chapel Hill, North Carolina." So I looked up Jane Ludington and it said two button road. And I said, Two Buttonhole Road. I said, "Whoa." So I said, "Oh, I've got to get in touch with her." So I wrote her a letter. And this was recently, just before Thanksgiving. And I wrote her a letter and I said, "Look, I'm writing a book. I can't believe, did you donate letters to the New York Historical Society?" And I sent her a letter, no response. Around Christmas, I called her. And I went online and, oh my God, her number was on the computer in the white pages. I said, "Okay." So I called and I said, "Hello, Jane Ludington." She said, "Yes." I said, "This is Jane Ludington?" She said, "Yes." I said, "My name's Vin Dacquino." She says, "Oh, from Mahopac. Hi, Vinny." I said, "Wait." She said, "Yes. Remember we met at the 2001 family reunion of the Ludingtons. After I published this book, the family invited me to the family reunion. I've been to about 6 of them. And she was there. My wife was there as well. This is my wife, June, by the way. Was there, and we sat on a bed in the room. It was like, and they were there, and and I said to her, "Look," she said, I said, you remember I wrote a book?" She says, "You signed one for me." I said, I did. I didn't remember, but I did. And I said, "I'm writing a new book. I said, look, I need you to just verify that you gave all these letters to the New York Historical Society. She says, yes, they were in the carriage house, in a filing cabinet. Mice were starting to get in there. So I just felt that we had to do something with them. So I donated them there. And these letters are absolutely amazing. I have been trying desperately to pinpoint proof that Sybil took this ride. Well, I don't have the military documentation. I don't have anything from a general. I don't have anything from the pension papers, although I do have some amazing. I have a letter when Sybil was 73 years old. One of her father's soldiers went to her and said, I'm trying to get a pension, and I was hoping that you could write a letter for me saying that you knew me and that I worked for and with your father during the revolution. And she did. At 73 years old, she supported that. And she said, I am the colonel's daughter. And the letter clearly says she was totally aware of everything. She said that there were alerts constantly being called from her house. Did she say she went on them? No. But would she? And what good would it do for this Jonathan who wanted her to write the letter? The pension, the government didn't care who called him to the battle. They wanted to know if he was in the battle. And that proved it. So he would not have mentioned the person who called out the alert. But it helps us be clear that Sybil was very aware of what her father was up to. Anyway, flip. This is a pension letter from the first book, signed by Sybil. This tells us that her husband was a 3-time member of the Revolutionary War. This guy was with the Bonham Richard, John Paul Jones. And 3-time hero. Now that's going to be important in a little while because you're going to find out that at 77 years old, Sybil Ludington filed this pension letter. She was 77 years old. Now I know why, and I have letters from her grandchildren to explain what was going on at that time. I even have a letter from Sybil to her brother explaining that her son was dying in front of her and that she was so fearful that she would have to close his eyes, but he closed his own eyes. Now here is a woman who stood by her son from the day he was born to the day he died. And I'll talk to you more about that in a minute too. Flip. David Meade. Did Colonel Ludington, in fact, fight in that battle? Were his troops involved? Following, he marched with a company of militia from Fredericktown under command of Captain Joel Meade to Litchfield in Connecticut to intercept the British on their retreat from Danbury. They united with other companies near Compo Point in a regiment commanded by Colonel Henry Ludington. Flip. Ezra Ferris. That in the spring of 1777, he was a volunteer in the militia from the same company, something April, and Colonel Ludington's regiment. Flip. Sybil's deposition. This is the letter that she wrote people, there's no question, the handwriting is beautiful. There were no letters that I couldn't read. It's all plain and clear. Flip. Check this out. Martha Lamb gave no sources. Oh no? Copied from article given to Mrs. Lamb, January 1878. She wrote the article in 1880. We now know the source of Martha Lamb's information. The Colonel's grandson, Charles Ludington, was an amazing young man. I have, as a gift from Jane Ludington, a journal written by him. Unfortunately, the journal ends just before he began a whole almost obsession with Sybil and his grandfather. And Charles began soliciting his family, saying, what do you know about Aunt Sybil? What do you know about grandfather? And sent letters out to everyone. Most amazingly, Flip, he sent a letter in 1854 to Connecticut. 1854. He sent it to Henry Deming, Esquire. In this letter, he talks about Sybil's ride. He talks about how Sybil saved her father's life. This is 1854, the earliest known mention of this ride, written by the Colonel's grandson. Now, I flipped out and I said, there it is. There it is. That's what I needed. I needed something from the family that would discuss the ride early enough. 1854. Well, when I saw Henry Deming, Esquire, and I saw that he was writing to a man who was supposed to be the orator for the dedication of the statue to Wooster. David Wooster, remember, was killed in that battle. He was a Mason, and the Masons were honoring him. So he wrote a letter and said, look, I'm going to come. And please, my grandfather wasn't given the credit he deserved, and neither was my Aunt Sybil. Well, I immediately jumped on the phone and called Ingrid, the head of the Danbury Museum, and I said, was there an event in 1854 for Wooster? And she said, hang on a minute. She came back and she said, yes. I said, was the orator a Henry Deming? She said, yes. It's right in the book, The History of Danbury, Connecticut, by, and I can't remember his name right now, but she read it to me right off the book. So I said, okay, this is it. Wasn't it? Better. Flip. This is the second page, specifically talks about his Aunt Sybil and the battle. Flip again. Now, this is an envelope from Pelletreau. The Pelletreau envelope with notes from Charles in 1886. We now have the source of Pelletreau's information. Pelletreau never gave his source for his Ludington information. What was amazing, he also gave him the register from the Ludington, no, not the Bible. He had like a business register. And in there were the names of all the children, and lightly written right next to Sybil's name was Henry Ogden. So actually, the mistake did not come from Pelletreau. It actually came from Charles. Why or how he put that name there, I don't know. But that's what threw off Pelletreau. Also, the information that he gave him were sketches of his grandfather, but not Sybil. And because he didn't include that information to Pelletreau didn't do it. Well, in that hunt, that doctor who wrote that paper, she said, come on, no historians wrote about Sybil. If that ride was so important, why didn't they write about it? Well, first of all, they're not going to write about a girl in the Revolutionary War. They had soldiers to write about. Also, they didn't know about it. 1880 was the first mention by Martha Lamb. Even though all the information for the memoirs in 1907 were given by these two guys, by Charles Ludington and his cousin, they never wrote about it. They kept all of these wonderful letters and then gave it to the people that they thought would be able to give her the recognition she deserved. So they went to Martha Lamb, and then eventually they went to Willis Fletcher Johnson, but years later. So, flip. And here's the one that flipped me out. And for this, I'm going to put my glasses on, and I'm going to put the lights on. Because, put it up, Charles had an older sister. And by the time that they were getting together and getting excited and trying to get information from all of the family, Charles's older sister got information from Charles's daughter, Catherine. And she answered Catherine, and she said, "Dear niece," and now I'm going to read that letter to you because in my opinion, here is the golden goose. This is what we've been looking for. Listen to this letter. Dear niece, I hope you will pardon my delay in replying to your letter of inquiries in regard to our ancestors. I really remember so little of what I used to hear about the early days and life of our dear old grandparents and their two older daughters, and only regret that I did not jot down many of the incidents related to me in my early days, that I did not know how pleasant and useful it might be in after years. Grandmother and Aunt Sybil were the only ones whom I remember to have talked much with me about their early lives. Grandmother died when I was but 10 years old in 1825. Sybil died in 1839. She was very much alive while Sybil was alive. Your father, I think, has more of the history of our grandparents than I have. I can only remember that in the beginning of our American Revolution, that owing to the frequent and prolonged absence of our grandfather, the cares of our family, who were young, Aunt Sybil and Aunt Rebecca being the oldest, were his only dependents, the former being about 15 years old, and she stood in the place of an older son to her father. That makes her a soldier. It makes her a very important person of the Revolutionary War because she served her father, regardless of the fact that she was a woman. She must have been a girl of wonderful presence of mind and strong determination, under difficulties as none other would have accomplished what she did when her father received orders in early evening that the British were landed or had landed in Norwalk and were on their way to Danbury. His regiment being disbanded and scattered to their homes, they were called Minutemen, you know, Aunt Sybil mounted a horse at a moment's warning and with only a halter to guide him, no saddle or even a bridle, and rode through the woods nearly to the Hudson River, arousing the men, this in the night. She frequently, with her sister Rebecca, stood as guard on their upper piazza to protect her father. Both she and her sister were of the party at Fort Montgomery when that fort was surprised and taken by the British. I'm still studying that. I'm trying to pinpoint her at that fort, which would be so amazing. This next part, she was mistaken. But they were at the inauguration of Washington in New York, and if I mistake, no, she wasn't mistaken about that. And if I mistake not, it was there they met the gentleman whom they married. The inauguration was after she was already married. So she was wrong about that. They were at the inauguration of Washington, New York, and if I mistake not, was there that they met the gentleman whom they married. Edmund Ogden, whom Sybil married, and Henry Pratt, Aunt Rebecca's husband. The former I never saw, the latter once when I was a small child. Aunt Rebecca I never saw, but I have been told she was a very beautiful woman. This all took place before your grandfather was born. Aunt Sybil was a woman of strong character and remarkable intelligence, keeping up her interest in all public matters until the last. Of my grandfather, I was too young to remember. He died when I was 3 years old. I remember the old house well. Then she describes the house. So what do I have here? This is a letter from a woman who was at the family reunions with Sybil. The information she's giving you here is information she got from her Aunt Sybil and her grandmother. When Sybil protected her father from the British, the only people in the house was her grandfather, her grandmother, her sisters. Those are the only people who witnessed it. Who else could we turn to if we can't believe not family myths, family records? That's what we have here. This is not just a family story that was passed on. This is the generation. She was with Sybil while Sybil was still alive. So, I believe that this is the golden goose. I believe that this helps us to clearly understand that Sybil did in fact take this ride. Now, there are some glitches. For one, Laura Ludington Eustace, she married John Eustace from this area, was the niece of the colonel, and she wrote this letter in November 3rd, 1894. By that time, she was already 80 years old. But she was alive when Sybil was alive. And that's important for us. Now, also, I lost my train of thought for a second. The big issue here is whether Sybil took this ride. And where was it? In the letter from 1854, Charles said that she rode from Carmel to Cold Spring. This letter says she rode from Carmel almost to the Hudson River. In the memoirs, it said if you ride even today from Carmel to Cold Spring, you will find hazardous roads. There's no mention of the route. So where did this route come from? In 1935, there was a newspaper article about how the Highway Department, the Education Department, the DAR got together because they wanted to create signs for forgotten Americans who were heroes but never really truly recognized. So they wanted to create these markers. Well, you see them today. The gold and yellow and blue markers that say 1935 Education Department, that's where they came from. And what happened was the DAR did exactly what they should do. They sat down and said, okay, where could she have ridden and why. And what they did is they pinpointed the fact that if she were to ride that night, there's no way she was going to go to 400 men. She would have to go to the officers. The colonel had about 20 captains. If she went to those captains and those captains went to their men, they could then gather and meet at the parade grounds and then go off to Connecticut. So they took a map from 1854 and they went through this whole map and said, here's where this captain lived, here's where this captain lived, and they created a route that would make the most sense. So, was it a guess? Hell no. It was a good shot at trying to figure out where she may have ridden that night. So then she didn't go 40 miles? No, she went where Charles said. She went 25 miles to Cold Spring and 25 miles back. She went 50 miles. So what's the bottom line here? I'll tell you what the bottom line is. Sybil Ludington stood by her mother's side till her mother had her 11th child. Till Sybil was 23 years old. She helped her mother raise those children. An incredible daughter. She married a 3-time participant in the Revolutionary War. On the Bonhomme Richard, every man on that ship was a hero. That was one of her first naval victories. Married him. They had a tavern. The war was over. The tavern wasn't making any money. He convinced her to go to Catskill, New York, because it was the next New York City. Why would they even think that? It was right on the Hudson River. All of the supplies and produce passed right through it. All those men from those ships went in to drink. There were 24 taverns in Catskill. There's only one problem. In 1799, he died of yellow fever, and he left her a widow with a 13-year-old kid to raise. She bought a tavern, and she ran that tavern. She bought it for $735. She sold it 6 years later, maybe 7, for $2,200, 3 times what she paid. At that time, her son, who was now a lawyer, this single mother raised this child to be a lawyer, was now married to Julia Peck. How did I find this out? It was on an index card in a museum up in Coxsackie, New York, in a place called the Bronx Museum, in a little tin container, all these index cards, and it said that he married Julia Peck. So she took Julia and her son and their baby, Edmund Augustus Ogden. And she went up Unadilla with that money. They bought a house, and according to those pension papers I found, she stayed with them for 30 years. And according to the letter that she sent to her brother, she buried her son. She stayed with that son until the day he died. Outstanding daughter, outstanding wife, outstanding single mother, outstanding businesswoman. In a business dominated by men, there were 24 innkeepers, 1 female, the widow Sybil Ogden. An incredible daughter-in-law, helped that daughter raise those 6 children. An incredible patriot. She took this amazing ride, and also at 73 years old wrote a letter for one of her father's soldiers to help him get a pension. And then, after her son died, I have a letter that says he was absolutely broke. They had no money. They had nowhere to turn. She applied for a pension. When she did, they said, "We need your marriage license." her daughter, Emily, who died at 21 years old, shortly after, sent a letter and said, we need a marriage certificate. They couldn't produce it. Andy, where are you? You're going to be fired. Get over here. No. Click. Click. This is Aunt Laura's letter that I read to you. Click and click. And by the way, the reason I did this is so that you could see I didn't make that letter up. Here it is in Laura Hughes' handwriting. Okay, flip. Flip, flip, flip. Now, this is Emily. This is the granddaughter. This is to Louis Ludington, which is her brother, who is the father of Charles, who did all of this work. Flip, and here is the letter from the government. Rejection letter, because she couldn't produce. She proved that her husband served 3 times, and it said the claim was rejected on the grounds of insufficient proof of marriage. At 77 years old, Sybil Ludington died, was put on the back of a buckboard, and was brought from Unadilla, New York, to Patterson, New York, where she rests today, behind the church. Flip. I was able to track every single one of those grandchildren, all 6 of the grandchildren, 4 boys, 2 girls. And Richard, who incidentally served, had 2 daughters. The second daughter married Samuel Abbott IV. I have been in contact with Samuel Abbott VIII. And I've been in contact with one of the great-great-great-granddaughters who is putting in her application for the DAR as we speak, under the name of Sybil Ludington, not Colonel Ludington. And she is hoping that the DAR will recognize her as the great-great-great-great-granddaughter of a United States patriot, Sybil Ludington Ogden. There's a great deal more detail than I gave you tonight in the book. Unfortunately, these letters are not in the book, because what happened was I submitted my manuscript to my publisher, and the book was ready to go, and that's when I found the letters. And he said, "You can't do that. We've already gone through your book. We've already made corrections." I said, "Well, it's not done yet." And he said, well, look, we'll let you put maybe 25% more, but you can't add all these things you just found. So I was limited to what I could include. So the book has a lot of what I just told you tonight, but it doesn't have the actual facsimiles of the letters. Go to New York City, go on the corner of 77th and, what's that park? Central Park West. And right there on that corner, go in and they'll let you look through the boxes and see the actual letters. Any questions? Yes.
Just to give you a little piece of information, when I first talked to him the first time, he mentioned Unadilla, New York. I said, who knows where Unadilla is? Unadilla is up on the Susquehanna River, 1962. My dad bought a farm and he retired up there, and he got 280 acres up in Unadilla. And when he started explaining to me about Sybil's house, I says, I know that house. Because he told me right where it was. And I know the house.
That's an amazing story too, because they believed that it was next door to the church, that the gardener, the kid that they hired, put the lawnmower in the shed while it was still hot. and it burned Sybil's house down. You know what I found out? Wrong. They moved Sybil's house on logs before that happened. That wasn't her house. Her house was, and they knocked that down in the 1960s. But Unadilla, I'm driving down 88 and I see the sign Unadilla. First exit for Unadilla. I said, whoa, 2 exits, that's pretty big. It must be a big, yeah. You go in, you go down the main drag, and you go out. And that's it. It's like one road, and there's like little side streets, and that's it. That's Unadilla. But she lived there for 30 years. Her grandson, where do you think he went to school? West Point. And he became a well-known soldier, revered. He helped to found Fort Riley. When cholera broke out and women and children were dying, the other officers left. He stayed there to nurse them and died at 44 years old, saving women and children. Not only was she all those things, she was an incredible grandmother who raised a hero. Everything about her is what we would love to believe that great Americans are made of. She is the kind of person that we have to respect and know. And we have to remember that so many great women and children of all colors and creeds are heroes too. There's no one definition for a hero. And Sybil represents the strength in women. Just one more little thing. In that museum exhibit, there's a sign that said Sybil was a kid patriot, a child patriot of the Revolution. Sybil was 16 when she took the ride. Her mother was 14 when she got married and 15 when she had Sybil. She was no kid. She was a woman. And she was a woman who knew what she was doing that night, risking her life at the chance of never making it home. She is a true American hero.
Are there any pictures, paintings, likenesses of her?
You know, people have sent me them. In fact, Jane Ludington sent me a picture. She said, "Is this Sybil?" I said, "As far as I know, no." Remember, Sybil was not recognized as a hero. She didn't even recognize herself as a hero. In the letter by that doctor, or the woman going for her doctorate, she said, Sybil never even mentioned it. Because Sybil never thought that it was anything of a big deal. Sybil did what she had to do. And if it meant risking her life, she did it. She didn't brag about it. She didn't even know that it was important by the time she died. So who was going to paint her picture and why? She was a tavern keeper. So the likelihood of there being a photo of her is not likely. Her father, yes, and we have a description of her father. We have I do have a photo of Edmund Augustus Ogden before he died, and I did put it in my first book. If she looked like him, I'm in trouble. But so we don't have that. And as far as documentation, isn't a letter from a niece who was with her aunt and was told stories by her aunt, doesn't it count for anything? So I'm hoping that the DAR will say, hey, one thing that the DAR said to me was, if you have a letter, then Sybil had to have been alive when that person was alive. She is. Sybil had to have done an act that a soldier would have done. She acted in place of an older son. She said it. So I'm hoping that this will be enough. If not, then she's still a hero to me, and I hope she's still a hero to you. Hey, good to see you.
My quadruple great-grandfather was John Ryder, came to Carmel in 1735, and in the Ryder family history, there's notations that he 3 times enlisted in Colonel Ludington's militia. I have no idea whether he was on that trip out to, over to Danbury.
May very well have been.
And the bank that I worked for, Putnam County National Bank, was formed from two banks.
And a Ludington worked for it.
Two Ludingtons were on the original board of directors, and I have their pictures. I have all it's the pictures of all of the original board of directors of the bank, and they look like one stern group of
Yep.
people.
And Lewis Ludington had a mansion right across from, a big house, right across from Lake Glenida. And that's where young Charles used to come back to. He had a business on Madison Avenue, and those envelopes have his address in Madison Avenue, and he used to come back to the homestead, back and forth.
That wasn't the Ludington Arms, was it?
Not the Ludington Arms. The Ludington Arms was I believe an aunt. Oh, the what? That was Lewis. Yes. Well, Lewis was Charles's father.
That's right.
So yes, it was the Ludington Arms. So
Well, the Ludington
The-
Arms was on what we know as Fair Street.
right, and then
On Main Street.
but then the Lewis Ludington's house was down further, right? I was trying to pinpoint it. There's pictures of it in the box.
Almost down where Ray lives.
Yeah, where you live. The Ludington house, yeah, the Ludington house, as far as I could see from the drawing, was where your house is.
My house was built in 1865 by Judge Ambrose Ryder.
Oh.
He was the original builder.
Who was the next door neighbor?
No,
I could have been Ludington. The picture that I have shows the lake and it shows the house. And the house is right about where yours is. Maybe more where the church is.
North,
Yes.
There's a very old, there's three houses there. The northernmost house was owned by the Cranes, and that goes back in the 1700s.
The journal that I have, Jane Ludington took Charles's journal and she transcribed it and sent me it. But it was when he was 20 years old until he was, until like 1840, maybe 1842. And then this letter was 1854. So it was during that time that he was going back from the city, and the journal's all about his trips to Carmel. Wonderful little stories about Carmel and about the lake. It's a wonderful history, and it's in the box. And you're welcome to go to the New York Historical Society and take the box out. I flipped out. I mean, I was there so many times. The guy was like, "Oh, here he is again." Yeah.
Excellent work. Really
Oh,
good
thank
work.
you.
Two quick things. I was down in South Carolina in Charleston 2 years ago, and I forget the name. There's an outdoor monument park. I think it's called Green Gardens or something like that. It's right north of Charleston, and they have all these sculptures, outdoor gardens, and they have an indoor section, and they had another statue
Yes.
in this garden.
There's
in
another
South
replica
Carolina.
of Sybil. There's one in Washington. I have it in the new book.
In South Carolina, right above Charleston. And the other thing is, in 1777 was basically the whole war was around here, and I can't find it, but I've been looking. Supposedly Alexander Hamilton in the Hamilton papers, he was
I
Washington
know.
aide de camp, and he mentioned the rise.
Yes, he does. And I can't find it either, but I will tell you what I did find.
And John Jay was married.
Go in there all you want. People are going to say to you, I mean, Google Sybil, and they're going to tell you that George Washington stopped at the house to thank her. I cannot find that document, but her son wrote a letter to Charles, her grandson, Richard, and he said that when my father died and grandmother went to her sister's for a while, she took with her all the letters from George Washington that she treasured so much. I believe they're probably lost, he said in the letter. So he does refer to the letters from George Washington. Do we have them? No.
And that's where she would have met Hamilton, because she was always with Washington.
So do I believe those exist? Now check this out. This is where I am today. The memoirs are attributed to Lavinia and Charles Ludington. Lavinia is Charles's single sister. She never had children. I don't think she was ever married. I have nothing from her. Absolutely nothing. Not a letter, not a note, nothing. I have plenty from Lewis S. Patrick. He was Caroline's, he was Frederick's daughter's son. So they were like second cousins. The two of them actually created a form for the Ludingtons and mailed it to all the Ludingtons asking for information, specific questions. That's in the box too. And Lavinia is not mentioned. What part did Lavinia play? And does she have any records? Furthermore, the memoirs. Where are Willis Fletcher Johnson's papers? He had all, throughout the whole book, he's mentioning the documents, like the Washington letter. Even John Jay, all of those, where are they? Want to blow your mind? Lewis S. Patrick. I tracked him down. I called 7 states. I tracked him down. I called libraries. I called everything. Oh my God. He worked for a senator in Washington, D.C. And that senator was involved in like a scandal. And he was his like first-hand man, or whatever they call a senator's. And one night, he was in Washington with his wife. The senator was at a party at his home. Lewis S. Patrick went to the drugstore to get his wife an ice cream and got a heart attack and died on the street. Where are his records? Now, the letters that I have are all one-sided. They're all really Charles's, because it's Charles's ancestors who saved them. So, are there missing records? Is there even more than I found? Yes, but I wasn't waiting for another 20 years to write another book. I might, but for now, I think we have a lot of ammunition. And I'm hoping that the DAR sees that. I'm hoping that they recognize it. If they don't, well, then that's one avenue that we don't have, but we know. And I'll tell you for sure, I believe. Yes.
Two things. One, the exhibit in the CAR Museum.
Yes.
I saw it 2 years ago, and your books were donated by Celeste Gothi, who's a member of DAR.
Wow.
I don't know which chapter, but she's an associate member of Melzinga in Beacon, but she donated your books to that exhibit.
Thank you for, because I didn't know that.
She's a senior for Highland Pass CAR chapter.
Is she still alive and well?
She's senior for, well.
If you could give me some information, I'd like to send her a thank you.
And then,
Yep.
DAR, for your ancestry, it doesn't, I'm a member of the Beacon Melzinga chapter. It doesn't have to be a soldier, it's somebody who provided material support to the revolution. So you could be a judge, you could have driven a wagon of supplies, you could have provided blankets to the
How about an aunt?
So-
I mean, a niece.
Yeah, so it's not just that they were a soldier, it's.
I'm hoping. I just got good news. I'm going to be doing a talk for the Mahopac Library on June 4th, and I was told that the DAR said that they will be coming.
The
So,
Enid Crosby chapter is really trying.
yep, the Enid Crosby chapter has been wonderful. Jen, who's the what do they call it, the regent, has sat with me more than once. They would love to see it happen, but they also can't fight the National. But the National really is not against her. people have misinformation. They think because they're not making her a patriot, they don't believe she took the ride. They do believe she took the ride, they just need the documentation. And because she's a woman, it's difficult. Because it's not gonna, there's no military records, there's no pension records, because she's not a man. And so it's very difficult. So I'm hoping that they're willing to say, hey, a letter by someone who was alive when she was alive, saying that she met her and got the story directly from her, might be enough. Yes,
You said you were gonna be in the Hopeback Library
June 4th.
what time?
It's early, 6:30.
This is my 11th presentation, and I have 15 more scheduled. And they're either 6, 6:30, or 7, and I can never get it straight. But go online, yes, go online to my website, and it's there. And I put my whole schedule there for, so that people would see.
Hey, Vinny,
In your research, did you find a family tree for the Ludington family?
Absolutely. I not only did I find a family tree, I've been going to the family reunions, even in Ludington, Michigan. And they gave me a family tree. It looks like a roll of paper towels. It's a whole roll. What was wonderful about it, it had Sybil and Edmund with 6 blanks for the 6 children she never had. And they thanked me because I was able to straighten it all out. But I do have that, and this here is a never before seen document. And because no one knew what happened to the 6 grandchildren. They literally disappeared. And I was able to track every single one of them down.
Question,
Yes,
are the records for Ludington about him being in Washington, or did they get burned?
that's a good question. Wait, which ones?
For the Revolutionary War, the fact that he was a colonel, because I did research on my family and
Yeah.
found all the records.
Oh, his
were burned.
records, yeah, Ludington's records are there, and Sybil's there, except it's CYBABOL, and they crossed it out and did CYBAL. You know, there are, I have that in the beginning, there's like
That's what you call.
13 names. Just go back very quickly, all the way to the beginning.
Vinny, I like when, the monument for
Edmund Augustus Ogden. Yep.
That monument is also the center of the United States.
Is that right?
Yeah, I told
Oh, God, I missed that.
Material.
It's in Kansas.
And it has an illustration of it, and it has a fence around it. And
Yep.
it says underneath it that this is the center of the United States, and that it is also the monument to.
Oh, wow. And that monument that they created for Edmund Augustus Ogden, they used to tie cows to it and donkeys, and you know, and then they finally, one of the generals said, hey, it's a monument, man. So they cleaned it up, and they also sent a monument to Unadilla. But I went to Unadilla, you know, no trace of Sybil whatsoever. She lived there 30 years, and there is no trace of her. Her grandson went to West Point, gave his life, the ultimate sacrifice for women and children. Not a plaque, nothing. I went to Catskill, New York. I stood on the spot where Sybil had her tavern with Andy. The woman who owned the house brought us down in the basement and said, put your foot over here. And we put the foot, and she said, you feel that lump? I said, yeah.
You couldn't see
That's
it.
the cement foundation where Sybil's tavern was.
It's brick in the
That's the house. It was over here, and we were down in this basement. And the house is a beautiful house on the corner of Green and Main. Well, what I did is when they said her husband died of yellow fever, I went and looked up medical repositories, and there was one for yellow fever Guess where it was centered? On the corner of Green and Main, where her deed for her. And that woman went through it all, still ended up making 3 times what she paid for it, and had that tavern. She was an amazing woman, an amazing woman. Other question, yep.
Years ago, Floyd Fisher spoke to us and said she was rather a tomboy because she was the eldest and did a lot of chores that brothers would have done if they were older.
You know, here's something that I had to deal with, and it's called embellishments. And we have to be careful because there were a lot of people who loved Sybil. How do you know her horse was named Star? Star was created by a woman named Eric Berry. Eric Berry wrote a book about Sybil. It was a pseudonym. Her real name is in my book. I can't remember now. Ellen, I think something. And she wrote a book about Sybil, and one of the things she mentioned was a horse named Star. So what happened was a lot of naysayers take these things. For example, I'm going to tell you this right now. I told you I don't have all the answers, but check this out. Charles, he had Sybil on a man's saddle with a hempen halter. Aunt Laura had her bareback with a hempen halter. The statue has her side saddle with a skirt. So, do I know which one? I don't. But I could tell you that. Same thing with the ride. Could I tell you exactly where she rode? No, but I could tell you the origination of the route. I could tell you where the route came from and who created it. It wasn't Sybil. As far as we know. Now, I'll tell you another mind blower. In the 1854 letter, do you know why she wrote to Cold Spring? To tell General Putnam that Connecticut was being attacked. Now, did she? I went up there and researched my brains out to try to prove that Sybil had been there. The closest I could come is Aunt Laura said she was at Fort Montgomery. She had some connection to that Cold Spring area. She evidently had been going back and forth there.
Well, she had, according to a lot of the records earlier that we went in through, she had been on inspection trips with her father.
With her father. Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's why she knew where the men lived.
And not only that, she took a lot of shortcuts that they didn't take with the family. Family knew shortcuts to get to these different places.
True.
But yeah, I've seen a lot of weaker affidavits where soldiers swore they were in a certain battle with another soldier. I bet you get the right person.
Man, you have no idea how many pension records I read to try to find any little trace from any one of them. But again, the problem is, if in a pension record they said who called out the alert, it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't help them with their pension. Thank you very much for coming. Oh, I forgot to tell you, the speech is only going to be a half an hour. Thank you.
Thank you, Vinny.
Oh, thank you. Thank you all for coming. I will be all over the place.
Why don't you wait for coffee and you can...
Yep, and if you have any questions, please, books are still available. I want to thank my wife for being here with me, and Andy too. And thank you all for your support.